It's always really exciting to be at Stanford. I think you guys have it special over here, and I've visited a few campuses around the world, and every time I come back, it's really awesome to be here. So just want to give you a little bit intro, but before I do that, I actually want to take a little bit of a poll, so I can kind of have an idea on who you guys are and what you guys want to be. So I'm an engineer, and most of you maybe are in engineering. And maybe if you can take a look at this question and say, what do you want to do when you grow up? So just as a show of hands, so the options are be a founder of a company, stay in academia, have a people management role in industry, have some technical role in industry, and no idea. So just number one, who wants to be a founder? All right. Oh, actually, wow. Maybe half the class. Who wants to stay in academia? Okay. Well, one or two. Who wants to have a people management role? All right. Three or four. Who wants to have a technical role in industry? Two or three. And no idea. Oh, wow. Almost half the class. All right. Great. So that's actually a pretty great mix. So I actually was probably, throughout my career, it ranged all five. Like when I started, I was probably five when I was like undergrad. And then it went to four, and then it went to two, and then it went to three, and then one, and then probably I'm at one now, and probably want to go back to maybe three eventually, or maybe two. So it'll change, but I can go into it. So just a few of the highlights. I just want to talk about just my background, where I came from, talk about Arterys, our company, and then lessons learned along the way. So about me. I'm originally from Vancouver, Canada, and I got my undergrad degree in mechanical engineering at University of British Columbia. I was always interested in cars. I was part of the SAE, we did Formula One cars at the time, and was always interested in aerodynamics actually. From there, I actually worked in industry. And being from Canada, I always thought that was the best thing in the world. You know, working for these large companies. I worked in Germany, I worked in Canada, and being there, as being part of engineering teams, I realized that's not what I wanted to do. It was political, it was bureaucratic, it was slow, there were processes, and I realized if I were going to move up anywhere in my career, I had to do something different. And at the time, I decided, hey, I'm going to apply to a few schools in the States and try to get a good spot and go into grad school. And so I did, and I got into the Aero-Astro program. I didn't have funding. When I arrived, and I also didn't have a plan of how I was going to pay for school. So when I arrived, I knocked on doors. I literally knocked on doors to try to get TAs, RAs, try to find funding, and I did. I found a great professor, and we came up with a business plan of how we're going to fund my research and fund what I was going to do, which was in Formula One cars. So he was an ME because I knocked on all the Aero-Astro doors and they were all closed. So ME was a great opportunity, and that's how I got started really. So I actually worked in got a funding through the Toyota Formula One team, and we did a lot of research on aerodynamics of the front wheel assembly of the car, and that took about a few years. I hadn't intended to do my PhD, but it just kind of happened that way. You know, there were a lot of master students that were there at the time that said, "Oh, I probably won't do a PhD," but that eventually changed, and I kind of got sucked into it and said, "Okay, well, I'll stay a few more years." Ended up being 4 or 5 years. But throughout that process, I kind of got sucked into this whole entrepreneurship thing. I mean, there were programs, there were opportunities, and that's kind of how it all got started. I actually took what was called PRE at the time, which was a program in innovation and entrepreneurship, which has changed it, and now there's all kinds of programs. And then in 2011, I started Arterys, and that's the history. So, but before I get into what Arterys is, just a little background on how we got started. I was working in my little lab, the corner of campus, really close to the circle of death, and somebody literally knocked on my door and Through a mutual friend, he was trying to look for somebody in physics who could simulate airflow through his upper airway, because he had seen a doctor that was going to do surgery on him. And he thought that if he was going to go through surgery, he didn't want to do that. And maybe he thought there's a better way to predict how that surgery would end up if only that you could do some sort of simulation or fluid simulation. And I was the CFD expert at the time, and that's how this idea to use simulations or to use kind of cloud computation kind of got started. So we worked on this idea and submitted it to this pre-program, and that's kind of where it all got started. And originally, Arterys was not about this problem of trying to solve upper airway disease using CFD. We actually tried that for several years, or for a few months, and that was challenging because going through the whole fundraising process, trying to raise capital, trying to find out how we're going to sell it in healthcare, it's challenging. So we actually hit a lot of roadblocks. And so in that year, basically in 2012, we learned a lot about the industry and the business. And the way we learned a lot is by going out and talking to doctors, talking to a lot of people who knew the field and knew how this technology could be used. And throughout that process, we met two other physicians. At the time, we're at Stanford, Albert Shao and Shreyas Vasanawala, who are our other co-founders. And that's really where it all got started. And they were working on a technology at the time, which was called 4D flow, which is a way to non-invasively measure blood flow using MRI. And throughout that partnership, the four of us decided to form a company. And that's how we started really from sleep apnea and really moving towards cardiovascular MR. And now we do something even differently. So with that, what is Arterys? So at Arterys, our mission is to really create an automated, intelligent imaging platform to unleash the real-world data to make healthcare accurate and data-driven. So that's what we're all working towards. And it's pretty broad. And what really our focus has been in the last few years is really we've developed a zero-footprint medical imaging analytics platform with deep learning that has FDA clearance. That's we're the first company to do this in the world. And what is medical imaging analytics, or what does a medical imaging platform mean? Well, what we're doing is we're collecting data from MRI scanners, from any scanner really in the world, and we're pushing all that data to the cloud, and we're allowing physicians or users to log in and process this data in real time, and process this data for their clinical workflow. So we're solving real clinical problems for them. And that's where the idea of machine learning or deep learning comes in. You can get very intelligent and smart as to how you can automate a lot of their workflow by using these types of technologies. Just in terms of the size of the opportunity or market, it's just the medical imaging market alone, at least for post-processing, is about $3.2 billion. So right now it's very local. You have very legacy software in these types of hospitals. And it's pretty archaic. I mean, even the algorithms or everything that's out there, it's very far behind the Facebooks or the Amazons or the Apples of the world. And there's a reason for that. It's primarily in regulation, primarily in the impact that a potential software vulnerability can have on a patient. So there's a lot of roadblocks in healthcare or getting software out. Also, there's other issues with regards to working with hospitals, selling infrastructure to hospitals, selling software to hospitals, the time it takes to get money or the sales cycles are very different from conventional applications. So in terms of kind of imaging today and what's the current status of the market, it's actually moving from right now a pay per use. So physicians in the past have gotten paid for every procedure, and it's moving to a value-based care model. So what does that mean? Really, physicians are getting compensated for outcomes, or compensated for how well a patient gets better, and not really about I'm going to make more money by doing this procedure. So that incentivizes everyone in the right direction. The field does suffer in general from lack of consistency. It's difficult to track patients across time, across different institutions. It's difficult to aggregate data. And the intelligence of a single of the work that's going to be done on a particular patient is really limited to the user or to the physician, and whether they've seen that certain issue or not. And that data is very rarely shared across institutions or across the world. So there's a lot of collective intelligence that you could bring by having a centralized system. And that's really what we're doing. There's also a need to make imaging more quantitative. So think of the idea of trying to quantify certain structures in the images and extract additional parameters from these MRI machines. You can extract so much more than just black and white anatomy images. There's a lot there, for example, blood flow. And lastly, you can combine different types of data for biomarkers. The ultimate goal really is to do predictive analysis, to try to identify what are the features that cause a certain disease. So there's a big opportunity here for change. In the conventional kind of imaging market, it's again local. The interfaces are very old school. Like measurements and reports lack consistency or structure. Everything is either oral, like dictated, or you have these handwritten reports, or it's all very, very scattered. And it's difficult to make any sense of this data. And again, automation has been difficult, and primarily because they haven't had access to data to try to automate these things. How we're changing that game is really using the cloud and aggregating that data in that single place to be able to provide insights. So we're providing very structured reports and quantified reports to make it consistent. I think consistency in healthcare is very important, so that you can have you can track minute changes over time and make sure that they're not biased by the reader. That's very important. And what do we do, or what are our main tasks? So they're primarily around detection of what's in the images of tumors or other types of things, classification, tracking, segmentation. These are fairly, these are the building blocks of what our back end does. In terms of, as I mentioned, this local approach today is really CPU-based, not a lot of advanced rendering or quantification, segmentation. Where we're moving to is this idea of pushing the data out to the cloud, very similar to the way Tesla is doing with their cars. If you push the data out, you can get so much smarter. And our backend is fundamentally GPU-based. We use GPUs everywhere in our stack, from rendering, quantification, segmentation, the machine learning. It's all has to be real time and fast. So just a few of the core technologies behind our system. Obviously, the cloud computation, the deep learning. It's a zero footprint browser-based interface. We have a unique piece of core technology that actually keeps all patient information in the hospital, something that nobody has done successfully using the cloud before. And of course, we have the FDA and CE mark and several regulatory clearances to sell our product into those markets. And as I mentioned, we're kind of changing the game in terms of how we're using this data to our advantage. Hospitals are just now realizing the value of that data that's just sitting there. And we want to leverage that data. And we want to make it accessible, not only for us, but also for everyone else out there. And the way we do this is again, it's a collective intelligence. We can take that data and get smarter over time. So you can think of it as people use our platform, we learn. We learn what they're doing. We learn the mistakes we're making, and then we're just constantly getting better, releasing updates. And finally, yeah, every physician benefits from all the thousands of other experts in the field. So it's really a great use of making quality analysis or quality care. And it's in this race, especially, it's important to have access to data. And really, the company that has access to data the fastest can really accelerate and become the most intelligent. And the way I think of this is let's say Tesla and Google. Tesla has 200 million miles driven versus Google has an order of magnitude less. And they're ahead, and they can stay ahead because they have that collective intelligence. And really it's the same thing in our industry as well. With that, I want to give you, in a sense, a demo of our system and how it works. I think it just helps to put a picture to words. So this is our system. We again have a way to access images anywhere in the world, where we have clearances in Europe and the United States, but really we're deploying our solution across many different other countries. So a physician logs in, clicks on a particular study that they're interested in, and then they can look at the study anywhere in the world. So I'm just going to reset my view here. So what you're looking at is a 3D image of the body. So what I can do is just natively in the browser, I can look at about 5 gigabytes of data. And the way we do this is we distribute this load across basically a GPU cluster of resources, and we spin up and down depending on the load of the system. So it's just 3D, and I can just hit spacebar here, and it's actually 4D in time as well. So you see the whole heart beating. And there's extra dimensions as well. So what I can do is I can turn on blood flow. So I can really, in one simple 10-minute scan, really see everything that's happening in your body. And this is a brand new piece of technology that we've partnered with General Electric or GE to commercialize and to deploy eventually across all the MR machines in the world. That's our really first application. And it's not only visual, it's also looking at, you can quantify several things. So here, this comes back to my CFD or computational fluid dynamics days, is looking at streamlines. So looking at where the flow is going. Red here is showing areas of high flow or high speed, and blue is low speed. I can also turn on vectors. So vectors can tell me the direction of flow as well, forwards or backwards. It's quantitative. I can measure blood flow through any artery or vein. So in this case, I've made a region of interest, and I can measure flow. In this case, it's 1 or 1.7 liters forward or net flow. I can make new measurements as well. So let's say I want to measure the flow in the pulmonary artery. With a single click, it tracks that pulmonary artery, it finds it, and it makes new measurements. So in this case, 1.68 liters per minute. And so these are the types of tools that radiologists want to use. They want to make imaging quantitative and consistent, and this is just one way to do that. And it's all about being able to identify, to track, and to classify what type of pathology is this in oncology, to try to assess what type of tumor it is. Looking at the texture, there's a lot of parametric data out there that you can aggregate. So this is the 4D flow product. We also have the product of looking at other types of data. So I can look at brain MR. So this is an example of lesion detection. So this is all for research use only at the moment. It's not on the market. And what I can do is I can go to what you're looking at is several different types of sequences. They're called, so different types of scans, and you can combine the different scans together to get different types of information. So if I go to lesions here, and I click on Find Lesions, what the system does is it identifies where these lesions are, and it identifies the enhancing region of the lesion, the core of the lesion, as well as the whole tumor, and it quantifies it. So it does really volumetric segmentation. And you'll notice I didn't have to do anything. Really, the back end of all this is machine learning and deep learning. And we have a production inference service where the data gets sent up. In real time, it's tracked, segmented, and pushed back to the browser in seconds. And from there, obviously, they have simple tools to be able to annotate or to track or to change the rendering. There's all kinds of specific radiology tools that you can use to report on the patient ultimately. A few other examples, looking at chest CT or nodule detection. So what I can do here is I can just maximize this particular patient here. So you're probably familiar with just looking at kind of chest X-rays. So CT is just a kind of a 3D chest X-ray. So what I can do is, you know, I'm just rendering the full chest cavity, and depending on the way of how you render this data, you can actually try to identify tumors or nodules. So here I click on Find Nodules, and it'll automatically track and identify where these nodules are. Something that's very time-consuming today using conventional radiology. So radiologists hate looking at thousands of images, and it's time-consuming, and they can miss them. So this is a perfect tool for machine learning. So with that, I have all kinds of demos, but I'll stop there, and if there's time at the end, we can go through some other cool stuff. But I just wanted to give you an idea of practically what we do and how it impacts the clinical care. So with that, our first clinical application is cardiac MR, and why is that important? It has enormous value for kind of the pain points, specifically in trying to diagnose structural heart disease. So what's happening inside someone's heart, whether their valves are leaking, whether they have a hole in their heart, whether they have a single ventricle. There's really structural issues that a lot of people have. And it's difficult to diagnose these using conventional approaches like echo or echocardiography. You have to be really an expert to try to identify what's in these images. Cardiac MRI, and specifically this technique, is different in that you just need to acquire a box, and a technician can just acquire that box very simply. So there's advantages there. It also provides an additional metric of the flow data, something that in imaging today just is not there. And in terms of kind of what our value add here is that we're providing something that's a 10x difference, and it's important to have really a very important 10x product, I call it, because it's difficult to just sell something that is incremental in hospitals. There's a big burden to actually get something sold into a hospital, and that's why you need to have kind of your Trojan horse to get into the door, provide something really of a clinical unmet need, and then expand from there. And as I mentioned, so this is our system here. So the conventional way of doing this is very manual. It takes on the order of half an hour to an hour to try to extract, for example, volumes of your ventricles, and we can do that in seconds now. So it's really that's why it's a paradigm shift compared to their manual techniques, and then using very simple tools to just click a few buttons and get all your answer very quickly. These are a couple examples of how we use the deep learning and how we use probability. So on the right, you see the probability maps there for the lung, and on the bottom, you see the probability of where we think the nodules are, and we take that information, then extract contours out of that so that these contours are editable, and physicians can edit those contours, and those edits get fed back into the training data, and that's how we get smarter and learn over time. As I mentioned, we are partnering with GE Healthcare, and that's a great partnership because we can develop the product, and they have the sales force and distribution to be able to get it out onto the market. Something that's very expensive for us to just to build out ourselves. So that's why it's important to have both direct sales channels, but also indirect sales channels, and leverage the larger companies out there. So it's a very important relationship that we have, and also that they're great at marketing and great at pushing the product out, and it's a great partnership that way. So we showed it at this big radiology conference at the end of last year, and it was one of the highlights of the whole conference. There were 60,000 people there, and Arterys won the best radiology software and best new radiology company. So we were very proud about that. We really have a great team. Just a little kind of history about the company. What's very important for us in terms of milestones is getting FDA clearance and getting regulatory clearance to sell our product. That's really the way our barometer of how we're measured. We incorporated, or we really raised our first round in 2013. We just had a few people initially, and then for a few years we developed the product, and then we raised our second round, or A round, in 2016. We grew to about 15 people, and now we are around 40 people, and going to raise our next round. We have a very rich pipeline of new products and apps coming out, and we're developing both the platform and new applications. So that's in a nutshell. Just in terms of team, as I mentioned, we have four co-founders, and we have different groups for regulatory, quality, strategy, machine learning, software, products. So we have a lot of different teams and sales, and we work very, very effectively with one another. In terms of status, we are active in about 40 research sites and have helped over 7,000 patients. So and what's great is because we can count. We know exactly how many patients are coming in and how people are using our software. Something that's very unique in this industry. So with that, I'll go into some of the lessons I learned along the way. I think when I started, I had no idea what I was about to start, and I can kind of I can imagine myself in your shoes today and thinking, what do I want to do? And hopefully, some of these lessons will help. And it's just a random mix of lessons, but it just helps to start to think about that. So the first thing I'll say is find the right partners you trust. I think doing things by yourself, yes, you can do it. Companies have done it before, but it just helps having a partner, having a co-founder. You can bounce ideas off somebody, and it just relieves some of the stress and some of the responsibility, and it's just extremely helpful. Even my co-founder says the same thing. He started it by himself. He started his first company by himself, and he said it's just so much easier just having a partner. The issue with that, though, is you have to think about whether you trust this person and whether they're committed to this. Also, in terms of like how long are we gonna spend on this idea? Because a lot of you, if you have an idea, you may not be working on it full time. Maybe you're still in school. And you may feel resentful if somebody's working harder than others. And what's interesting is that what you'll do is you may try to get fancy with how you split the equity in terms of how involved someone is to start off. And I would say keep it simple. I think just because somebody's working full time for a week on a particular project doesn't mean that they should get more revenue or more equity split, because hopefully you're building a great business, and a week isn't going to make a difference. And just I would say structure it in a way that makes it successful long term, and everyone is incentivized. It's not easy to do, but it's really important. With that, leverage the incubators that are around here. If you have an idea, there's now so many incubators. So just to give you an idea, Arterys has been through now 4 and growing. So we started at StartX in 2011, which is a fantastic program. It gives you access and accelerates your business so fast. Especially initially, you just don't have the funding to just incorporate or to think about payroll, think about lawyers, legals, contracts, infrastructure, servers, hardware. There's so much just initial investment that maybe you need just to provide a proof of concept before you get a friends and family round. So StartX can definitely help you there. And if you don't get into StartX, there's other incubators all the way around here. We, after StartX, went to the Hattery, which is an incubator up in the city. And we then moved to UCSF. We were part of the QB3 incubator. And we now just started at TMCX, which is an incubator at the Houston, at the medical school there. So it's, again, leverage all the infrastructure or kind of the resources that you have around you. Super valuable. The next is board. So you probably won't think about this early on, but as you raise your kind of first rounds, if you can do it with friends and family, your own personal money, and that's not an issue, great. But if you do get investment from a VC or some other investment vehicle, think about your investors. I think it's really important to trust them and make sure that you have control and you're all aligned. There's been stories endless stories about boards not agreeing with the founders, and it's really important when you talk to investors, make sure that there's a mutual fit, because that is, I can't say that how important that is. And for us, we've been extremely lucky. We have a great board, and we're definitely all aligned. Lastly is the network. I call it the Hoover Tower syndrome. The idea is everyone kind of sticks around here, and everyone helps in a different way, and it's extremely it's a useful tool that you should leverage. Everyone here is involved in some form with Stanford through a contact or university, or just through VCs, or there's so many people that know something here. So grow your network and leverage the resources that you have, specifically around Stanford. And Stanford is very unique. I can tell you, we probably could not have done what we've done so far if we were up in Canada or if we were up in Europe. It's such an advantage to be here in Silicon Valley. You have no idea. We have very similar companies that are trying to do the same thing in Quebec, and they're just not getting traction. And when they try to pitch to VCs here, it's just not the same. So again, having headquarters, having founders local is really, really helpful. It's not to say that then you can expand and grow your business in those other countries. So we are headquartered here in San Francisco, but we have offices in Canada and in France as well, and you can expand. The next lesson I've learned is the product market fits, and you've probably heard of this, and if you haven't, the first business school class, we'll talk about this. And specifically for us in healthcare, it's really about fitting into a clinical unmet need. So you really have to identify a pain point or an issue that people are willing to solve, and or people really need. That's really important. I can't emphasize that enough. What I'll say, before you have a great technology or great idea, just spend a little bit of time doing the market analysis, just to see if it's a worthwhile market. Because I can tell you there's so much technology out there, but if it's really not if it's not a big enough market, or it's not clear how you're going to sell it or make money, it's just not going to work out. So that is very important. I would say before you start, read a lot of postmortems. I don't know if you go to Hacker News or just Google postmortem, a startup. There's so many stories of other companies that maybe are in your space that have failed, and you can just learn so much about what they've done wrong, and just learn from that, and then move forward. I'd also say with that is don't be what's called a walking dead. There's actually a lot of companies that are just scratching or just hanging on by one last thread, and maybe just have been doing that for the last 5-10 years, and that's not something that you want to do. And so it's really important to know when to pivot, especially early in the process. Don't be afraid to pivot if it's not working out. And that's what we had to do. We really started in sleep apnea, which it was a tough market. For that particular market, you just didn't do a CT scan on a regular basis. So that helps tremendously. It's just having the courage to say, hey, it's not working. Let's just find a new route. And lastly, it's big market. If you're pitching to investors and the market size doesn't have $1 billion in it, it's challenging, to say the least. Now, that's not to say that it'll never happen, but investors nowadays are looking to invest in the Ubers, the Googles of the world, and they have limited time and bandwidth to invest in smaller markets. So you really have to have an engaging business opportunity for them and upside for them. So market size is obviously very, very important. The other lesson I learned is around revenue. And what I'll say, it's fairly simple to try to get to $1 million in revenue, but passing the $10 million mark is challenging. And the reason why I say it's challenging, it's because of this idea of crossing the chasm. This is another picture that's very common. Is just that you have this idea of the innovators. The innovators are the people that will buy your product just because it's cool and amazing. Then you have, in the next category, the early adopters. And really, you have this big delta between the early adopters and the early majority of people that will buy your product. And so crossing that chasm is very critical in terms of getting sustained growth. And it's especially in healthcare. Healthcare is driven by regulations and guidelines and laws, and it's challenging to get to the tail of this graph. And the late majority of the laggards is really half of our population. It takes time in order to get there, and that's why getting past this revenue mark is challenging. I also mentioned follow the money. That's why it's really important to understand you may have a great product market fit, but the idea is if you don't know where that money is coming from or how to tap into that, it will not work. And especially in healthcare, it's very convoluted and complex. You have insurance, you have brokers, you have the hospitals, payers, and it's just you need to tap into that system. And again, it's challenging to understand how you can take a little skim off the top, and everybody's trying to do that. Especially with the changing in regulations now and administration, things are in flux for sure. The next is success is in the people, not the technology. So again, you kind of have to have a great technology to start, and if you don't, then you're probably not going to get funding. But it just helps being surrounded by great people, and I can't emphasize that enough. This is a picture that we took during our retreat, and this is about maybe half of our team here. But it's really important just that you trust your team around you, and that you bring in A quality people. I can't emphasize that more. Company culture is extremely important, and I call it the no ass rule. Basically, one bad person can ruin your company culture. And I want to emphasize that ego is really the root of all evil. If you have one person who has a big ego, and you have the rest of the company that are really incentivized and trying to hit the company goals, and versus this person has an ulterior set of goals, it just clashes. And so far we've been very lucky, knock on wood. We'd have great people, but I've just known stories. You read postmortems that if you get people in there that have a different set of objectives, it just ruins that company culture. Apple is a very great example. I mean, Steve Jobs initially had a great vision about what he wanted to build, and he had a great early team, and they were all aligned. But eventually, when you get big enough, you just have different business units that are all pushing for their team in a different way, and it's very challenging just to be able to grow that culture, even when the company's in the thousands of employees. And I'd say actions speak louder than words. I really the people on my team that I trust the most, I guess, are the people that just do the job, that just hit their targets without saying anything. People that come to me and saying, "Hey, I need a raise. Hey, I'm looking for a promotion." That really it's kind of forced, versus the people that are in the corner that do their job and that do their job extremely well. By instinct, I look at them and I compensate them typically higher, just because they're doing the job and they're thinking about the company first. In terms of kind of learning the lessons, fire fast. So everyone makes mistakes, but it's really important to make sure that you don't cause a cancer in your company. We've been very lucky again, but it's hard. It's hard to get rid of people. But really, you have to think about it as part of the business, and think about how I can grow the business. And I'm not trying to create a personal relationship with everyone, but it's really about how do I get the most value out of everyone here and push the company first. And that's one of the most difficult things I have to do, is just making these very difficult decisions. Motivation is extremely important. So how do you keep your team motivated? We have kind of a culture ambassador on our team, and that's also one of my roles as Chief Operating Officer is just making people feel engaged and motivated and wanting to work there every day. That's what I honestly spend the most amount of time on right now, and it's not on algorithms. I mean, when you just start off, you're going to be working on the technology. But if you want to be a founder, you're going to realize you're going to move very quickly away from that. It's just because you're wearing so many different types of hats, and you're going to be, again, further and further away. And yes, you can attend those meetings, but it's going to be a meeting. It's not going to be an in-depth analysis. So if you want to be a coder and also be a founder of a large company, it's just not going to work. And so, like I said, I spend most of my days thinking about how I'm going to motivate everyone just to continue to work there, and that's through the values and through the culture that we're building. I also used tools to our advantage. So we use a lot of different metrics and different analytics internally. So like a tool called Mood Map, which is a great kind of survey that goes out to all the employees of the company, and that tells you whether people are happy, whether people are frustrated, and their progress for the week. And you can track that, and you can track it by team. And it's, again, tools that just to help you do your job. And we use tools for everything. And lastly, feedback. I think feedback is really, really critical. It's trying to understand and communicate with everyone in the team and get feedback, 360 feedback. So your direct reports should give you feedback, and you should give feedback to and vice versa. I think what really retains good employees is a positive relationship with their manager, and them being challenged. I think there's been studies on this, and it's really, really important. How many minutes do I have left?
3:20 is the stop.
Okay, great. I just have a few more slides. The next thing is lessons learned. So if any of you are interested in healthcare, what I'll say is healthcare IT software is very different from medical device software. So you'll hear about a lot of apps that are in the healthcare space that collect data and that push data around. It's very different compared to medical device. And what I'll emphasize about that is if you're creating a medical device, you're in a regulated environment. And what does regulations mean? It means a whole slew of infrastructure and documentation before you can sell your product. And one example is what's called a quality management system. This is, or QMS. This is a whole set of processes and procedures on how you run your business. So let's think of them as SOPs, or standard operating procedures. Each country requires a certain unique set of SOPs. And you almost need a full-time team just to make sure that your procedures are in line with the regulations that change on a yearly basis. That's a very core component of selling medical devices. If you think of it, every device that you own today will probably have a CE label on it. If you look at your iPhone, it says CE. Having a CE mark means that you need to have a quality management system in place, and that requires a lot of infrastructure and support and documentation. The next thing is design controls. So one thing that you can do if you're not selling a medical device is you can hack something up very quickly. You can productize it, you can push it to the Apple Store and start making money very quickly. That's not the case for medical software. You need to have very specific design controls, which means having a design input, so providing a certain set of requirements up front. You need to be able to develop based on those requirements. You need to be able to test, do the verification, validation, and there's a whole set of very, very specific set of milestones before you get your product out, and it's time consuming. And how does that fit, or that waterfall type of software development fit into agile software developments of being able to just hack something together, iterate very quickly? That's an issue, and that's something that we're still trying to solve today. Is how do we quickly iterate on the product, get feedback, but also push it out as quickly as possible? That's, like I said, very tough problem. Also, test-driven development. What we try to do is really write the tests up front and make sure that we use those tests and the integration testing frameworks and all of that to make sure that our medical device is safe and effective. So, like I said, all those things healthcare IT companies may do, but it's just an order of magnitude more work to try to get something regulated, because you need to prove that it works. You need to have the data to support that it works. And either clinical trials or having data with it, or have users use the data. So It's very, very important. The picture to the left is actually our latest submission. It was 13 inches tall, several thousand pages, and it's a lot of work. So that's, again, you would never have to do that if you're publishing an app. I'll also mention this particular slide of how important it is to communicate. These are all kind of lessons that, again, you don't really learn in school, of how to work with a team. I mean, yeah, they'll maybe put you in a team, but how do you really communicate effectively and pass on information from one team to the next? So this is an example of a customer asking for a rope swing. And here you'll see that how the customer explained it. You know, maybe a rope swing with 3 steps. How the project leader understood it. So this is really, really relevant to us. Like we have customers talking to us every day. We have product managers in that second category. And those requirements get sent to the engineer, which then writes these requirements out. In this case, came up with that design. Then you pass them to the dev team. Then the dev team takes that, and they have no idea what the customer wants, and they build something like that. The sales team will undoubtedly try to sell something magical, even though it's half-baked and doesn't work. There's no documentation typically. You have the operations or service team that goes and installs it. Again, there's no communication. How the customer was billed, how the help desk supported it, and what the customer really wanted. So that is a funny cartoon, but it's truly what's very typical in what we see. And every team is really important for the end product. So what I have there on the right is how important is each team to making the products be successful. And again, these are some of the things you just don't learn in school. What I'll mention here is kind of transitioning from academic to entrepreneur. Really requires focusing on commercial efforts. So don't be a technology looking for a problem. I think that's very important, and it's hard to detach from the technology. Focus on the people management, on the hiring, on the operations, on the processes, and really the go-to-market. So how are you going to sell this product? How are you going to market that? Those are the really types of things that are difficult to extract from. With that, I will. I think what we are is it time almost? I'll just mention a startup is a roller coaster of emotions. You're going to be happy one day and angry another day. I would say be even keeled, and because it's extremely stressful. I'll say the second thing is delegate. It's really important to know when to step out of a problem. Trust the people around you. Empower them to make very important decisions. Next thing for us is hire great software developers and software development teams, specifically for us. And we talked about this 10x product. Well, there's the 10x unicorn, but also there's the 10x team. I'll say entrepreneurship isn't for everyone. It's stressful. It's also you have a lot of responsibility. You're anxious. You have anxiety, and maybe it's not for you. And if you want to try things out, maybe go work for a startup, and maybe be an early employee at a startup just to see if it's right for you. And lastly, applying for the job. So let's say you don't want to be a founder of a company and you want to apply for a certain job. I have just a quick set of little rules that I'll say is be very specific as to which companies you want to work for. Target them on Crunchbase. Go to crunchbase.com and see the startups that have recently gotten funding. And then focus on those companies and focus on who's hiring, who's the hiring managers. And don't just send a resume and cover letter. Send them a message and be very specific as to how your skill set can help them. You have no idea how many resumes I receive, and I just never look at. But the ones that just send me direct business plans to say, hey, I know I can solve this particular problem for you, I actually look at. So that's just one lesson. Also, lastly, this is my 5-month-old newborn, and I'll say it's challenging to be a family person, but also be an entrepreneur. So take risks when you're young. It's much harder when you have a bigger family. And with that, thank you.
questions?
How's the culture across Arterys changed since it was founded?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you're small, I think you have to focus less on it, and it's really organic. Really, the people that you hire, the 2 or 3 people that are there to start off, you really don't think about it, but yet there's a 1-degree connection between what you want to instill and the values that you have with the people that are just core around you. So it's just organic that way. As we grow, it's much more challenging to have this kind of self-replicating effect. And that's why we put in so much more effort to try to keep that same company culture. So if I were to say in an ideal world, it'll always be the same, and it has been, that's the best answer, but it's probably not the same as what it was when there was 5 people. But we're working, it's constant evolution. We're constantly working towards it. And it's not just, I want to build a culture that's not just a 9-to-5 job. It's all about making people motivated and wanting to work there. Yep. Yep.
I'd like to ask, how did you get the seed funding raise?
Sure.
Did you come up with just an idea and business plan and go to the angels and get funding before you make the real product, or you make the product first and then go to the?
So great question. So the question was around how we got our seed funding, and a couple options was, you make the product and you try to raise capital, or you just have an idea or back of the envelope idea and then try to raise capital off that. For us, it was really about, before our seed rounds, is just getting enough friends and family cash to try to develop some proof of concept that we have something there. And maybe that something could be something that you license from other companies, or that you license from Stanford, which was, in our case, what we did. So we just raised a little bit of money just to have some core piece of technology. And then from there, we raised our series seed round. So it's unique. It depends on the technology, but I think you'll see less and less of paper napkin kind of checks. I think it's so competitive right now that investors are looking for something real, something that shows traction, and that's why you almost need either users, you need revenue, or you need something attractive in order for them to invest. Yeah. Yep.
Ask another question. So you mentioned that market analysis is very important, and I'm wondering, how do you make sure that the market need you thought is really a market need?
Yeah. So the question was around the market analysis and how did we do it, and how did we assess that it really was a market need there. And I would say we didn't really do a good job initially with this. We said, oh, there's a great technology. Let's try to sell this. And I think the real way to start doing it is talking to customers, talking to users. If you go to the B school or the business school, there's a lot of resources there in terms of looking at the market, and there's market reports. So going there and reading those reports, aggregating data, paying for surveys. Those are all things that we do now, and we spend tens of thousands of dollars on surveys, market analysis, customer interviews, blinded studies. So we do a lot of different things to see if there's really a market there. And like I said, in the beginning, if you don't have money, you just talk to a few people. But I'd say talk to people outside of Silicon Valley, especially if you're selling a product that's global, because you can get so skewed here in the Valley, especially if you're trying to sell something to Stanford. Everyone at Stanford is an expert. Go talk to some hospital in rural Ohio and just see if they're willing to pay for something. That's where you really learn. And all the Aeroastro doors, and they were all closed. So ME was a great opportunity, and that's how I got started, really. So I actually worked in, got a funding through the Toyota Formula One team, and we did a lot of research on aerodynamics of the front wheel assembly of the car. And that took about a few years. I hadn't intended to do my PhD, but it just kind of happened that way. There were a lot of master students that were there at the time that said, oh, I probably won't do a PhD, but that eventually changed, and I kind of got sucked into it and said, okay, well, I'll stay a few more years. Ended up being 4 or 5 years. But throughout that process, I kind of got sucked into this whole entrepreneurship thing. I mean, there were programs, there were opportunities, and that's kind of how it all got started. I actually took what was called PRE at the time, which was a program in innovation and entrepreneurship, which has changed it, and now there's all kinds of programs. And then in 2011, I started Arterys, and that's the history. So, but before I get into what Arterys is, just a little background on how we got started. I was working in my little lab, the corner of campus, really close to the circle of death, and somebody literally knocked on my door, and through a mutual friend, he was trying to look for somebody in physics who could simulate airflow through his upper airway, because he had seen a doctor that was going to do surgery on him. And he thought that if he was going to go through surgery, he didn't want to do that. And maybe he thought there's a better way to predict how that surgery would end up if only that you could do some sort of simulation or fluid simulation. And I was the CFD expert at the time. And that's how this idea to use simulations or to use kind of cloud computation kind of got started. So we worked on this idea and submitted it to this pre-program. And that's kind of where it all got started. And originally, Arterys was not about this problem of trying to solve upper airway disease using CFD. We actually tried that for several years, or for a few months. And that was challenging because going through the whole fundraising process, trying to raise capital, trying to find out how we're going to sell it in healthcare, it's challenging. So we actually hit a lot of roadblocks. And so in that year, basically in 2012, we learned a lot about the industry and the business. And the way we learned a lot is by going out and talking to doctors, talking to a lot of people who knew the field and knew how this technology could be used. And throughout that process, we met 2 other physicians. At the time, we're at Stanford, Albert Shao and Shreyas Vasanawala, who are our other co-founders. And that's really where it all got started. And they were working on a technology at the time, which was called 4D flow, which is a way to non-invasively measure blood flow using MRI. And throughout that partnership, the 4 of us decided to form a company. And that's how we started really from sleep apnea and really moving towards cardiovascular MR. And now we do something even differently. So with that, what is Arterys? So at Arterys, our mission is to really create an automated, intelligent imaging platform to unleash the real-world data to make healthcare accurate and data-driven. So that's what we're all working towards, and it's pretty broad. It'll change, but I can go into it. So just a few of the highlights. I just want to talk about just my background, where I came from, talk about Arterys, our company, and then lessons learned along the way. So about me, I'm originally from Vancouver, Canada. And I got my undergrad degree in mechanical engineering at University of British Columbia. I was always interested in cars. I was part of the SAE, we did Formula 1 cars at the time, and was always interested in aerodynamics, actually. From there, I actually worked in industry. And being from Canada, I always thought that was the best thing in the world. Working for these large companies. I worked in Germany, I worked in Canada, and being there, as being part of engineering teams, I realized that's not what I wanted to do. It was political, it was bureaucratic, it was slow, there were processes, and I realized if I were going to move up anywhere in my career, I had to do something different. And at the time, I decided, hey, I'm going to apply to a few schools in the States and try to get a good spot and go into grad school. And so I did, and I got into the AeroAstro program. I didn't have funding. When I arrived, I had, and I also didn't have a plan of how I was going to pay for school. So when I arrived, I knocked on doors. I literally knocked on doors to try to get TAs, RAs, try to find funding. And I did. I found a great professor, and we came up with a business plan of how we're going to fund my research and fund what I was going to do, which was in Formula One cars. So he was an ME because I knocked. And what really our focus has been in the last few years is really we've developed a zero-footprint medical imaging analytics platform with deep learning that has FDA clearance. We're the first company to do this in the world. And what is medical imaging analytics, or what does a medical imaging platform mean? Well, what we're doing is we're collecting data from MRI scanners, from any scanner really in the world, and we're pushing all that data to the cloud, and we're allowing physicians or users to log in and process this data in real time, and process this data for their clinical workflow. So we're solving real clinical problems for them. And that's where the idea of machine learning or deep learning comes in. You can get very intelligent and smart as to how you can automate a lot of their workflow by using these types of technologies. Just in terms of the size of the opportunity or market, it's just the medical imaging market alone, is at least for post-processing, is about $3.2 billion. So right now it's very local. You have very legacy software in these types of hospitals. And it's pretty archaic. I mean, even the algorithms or everything that's out there, it's very far behind the Facebooks or the Amazons or the Apples of the world. And there's a reason for that. It's primarily in regulation, primarily in the impact that a potential software vulnerability can have on a patient. So there's a lot of roadblocks in healthcare or getting software out. Also, there's other issues with regards to working with hospitals, selling infrastructure to hospitals, selling software to hospitals, the time it takes to get money or the sales cycles are very different from conventional applications. So in terms of it's always really exciting to be at Stanford. I think you guys have it special over here, and I've visited a few campuses around the world, and every time I come back, it's really awesome to be here. So just want to give you a little bit intro, but before I do that, I actually want to take a little bit of a poll, so I can kind of have an idea on who you guys are and what you guys want to be. So I'm an engineer, and most of you maybe are in engineering. And maybe if you can take a look at this question and say, what do you want to do when you grow up? So just as a show of hands, so the options are be a founder of a company, stay in academia, have a people management role in industry, have some technical role in industry, and no idea. So just number one, who wants to be a founder? All right. Oh, actually, wow. Maybe half the class. Who wants to stay in academia? Okay. Well, one or two. Who wants to have a people management role? All right. Three or four. Who wants to have a technical role in industry? Two or three. And no idea. Oh, wow. Almost half the class. All right. Great. So that's actually a pretty great mix. So I actually was probably, throughout my career, it ranged all five. Like when I started, I was probably 5 when I was like undergrad. And then it went to 4, and then it went to 2, and then it went to 3, and then 1, and then probably I'm at 1 now, and probably want to go back to maybe 3 eventually, or maybe 2. So